Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville. I'm Al Hunt. This week we are excited to have Biden confidant and former presidential candidate Senator Christopher Dodd to tell us about the developing Biden administration. Then Georgia expert and the host of Battleground Ballot Box, Stephen Fowler, will join us for the latest in the fight for control of the Senate. 2 races down there. Remember, we take your questions each episode, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and we love these questions. This episode is sponsored by Paint Your Life, United Harvest, and Great Courses Plus. Please check out the links to our sponsors in the show notes, and we thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps to make this podcast happen. Also, tell your friends about us. Remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. James, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving and you're doing well.
As well as one can under the circumstances.
That's well put. Well put.
Okay.
And that's all you can say.
The truth of them, right? That's all you can say. I don't think, we're probably doing better than 99% of the people because we don't have food insecurity or financial insecurity. Right. But this thing is just awful. It's
both important and hard to keep that in mind.
It is. And I did my class last night, and my last class it was the only thing I had to live for. It's Tuesday night and Wednesday podcast.
Wait a minute. How about our Sunday Zoom calls, James?
The Sunday Zoom call, right?
That's right. You can see what kind of exciting life we have. Listen, we got 2 great guests today. Chris Dodd knows Joe Biden as well as anyone on the face of the earth. He's very close. They served in the Senate together for almost 30 years. So I don't want to steal his thunder because he knows a lot more than I do. But let me just talk a little bit to start off with about the Biden administration to be. I thought he's getting somewhere between a 90 and a 95 on appointments and tone. That economic team is really impressive that he rolled out this week. Both the Clinton and the Obama economic teams were really, really first rate. Clinton had Lloyd Bentsen, Roger Altman, Bob Rubin. Obama had Tim Geithner and Larry Summers and Jack Lew. This team is just as strong, and that's a great compliment, and they may be even deeper. It's diverse, it's talented, they have great academics, they have people who really have, real life experiences, and they have a Treasury Secretary who has credentials like none other in the history of that department. So I got to tell you, I'm impressed, James.
Yeah, it's hard not to be impressed. I mean, Janet Yellen is simply starts out as the most qualified Treasury Secretary in history.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, she's had every big position that you could imagine, and
just don't tell Larry Summers. But you're right.
Okay. I don't tell Larry. She was, and by everybody's estimation, and I thought appointing her showed that Biden was really understands what a difficult economic time the country is going to be on January the 20th. And I can't imagine how difficult it's going to be because the pandemic stuff is getting worse by the minute. And the suffering is just unbelievable. I mean, then it's going to take a long time to dig out of this hole. And I'm glad that she's there to try to give it some guidance. That's all I can say. It's just, but we're not. I don't think people are emotionally prepared for how this next 60 days are going to go.
It is. It's going to be awful. There may be light at the end of the tunnel, but boy, it's going to be a lot of darkness before we get there. I would say I think there was one slip, and I want to say exactly why, and that's Neera Tanden at OMB. Neera is a really talented person. She's run CAP. She was in both the Obama and Clinton administration. And she certainly belongs at a high level in this administration. I think to appoint her to OMB, there'll be a really ferocious confirmation fight. I'm going to talk about the Republicans on this in just a minute. And the Biden team either will lose, which won't be good, or they'll have to use a lot of chits to get 51 votes for. And there are other good candidates they could have appointed, and they could have named her head of domestic policy, a really important job. She's a real talent, but she's a lightning rod, and I'm not sure it's worth the fight. And I really like Nira.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think you're right on all counts.
We'll see how it goes. I have, on this show, James Clyburn even tops James Carville. Maybe he is St. James. We think he has been the most important politician other than Joe Biden this year. And I'm going to take issue with him on something, which I hesitate to do. And I hope, in a way, I hope he's not listening. He insists that Marcia Fudge be named as Agriculture Secretary, and there's sort of an implication, not so much from Clyburn, but from some of the other African American leaders, Al Sharpton and others, that he hadn't done enough in pointing blacks to top posts. Well, first of all, let me address that. This guy, look at this. Look at this team. Will you look at that UN woman from Louisiana? She is hardly a figurehead. Look at Cecilia Rouse, Princeton Dean, head of the CEA, an African-American. Look at the Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. And you might take a look at Kamala Harris, the vice president, the most important post. 5 vice presidents have become presidents. So I think that is a total bum rap. And to go to Marcia Fudge, there's 2 reasons I think that would be an actively bad idea. One, I'm not sure she'd be a great appointment. There are other African Americans for other posts like the mayor of Atlanta who would be fabulous appointments. But secondly, Nancy Pelosi can't afford to lose a single other member, even if only for 60 days. She only has a majority of 4 or 5 in the House. And to lose that, there are going to be votes that are going to be very, very close, starting with her speakership. And I think to name someone at this point I'm not sure Cedric Richmond can go on January 21st. He may have to wait a while. And I think that this is a rare case where Jim Clyburn is wrong. Having said that, the Republican hypocrisy on some of this stuff, including Nira Tanden, I couldn't believe Rob Portman said, I don't like the fact she tweets so much. Oh, you don't, Senator Portman, really? I didn't hear you talking about your dislike for tweets over the last 4 years, or she's too partisan after you voted to confirm Tea Party's Mick Mulvaney. So I'm not defending any of the Republicans, and I give the Biden administration to be, as I say, a 90 or 95, but just a couple little small points.
Well, first of all, you don't know what Clyburn is doing here. These guys, they put that up and said, well, we can't do that, but okay, then there's a plan B behind it.
Right.
And I think that's what's going on here. And the problem also is this, is the Democrats, if you read Tom Etzel, if you read anything, if you just use your common sense, we got a problem in rural America.
Yep.
And I know the Ag Secretary, the food stamps and the administration of that is the biggest part of it. But symbolically, you really want someone from Cleveland running the Ag department. I just think that to some extent it's I think there's something else on the agenda, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Because you're right.
Well, you tell me no on this, okay, but now you can't tell me no on that.
Yeah.
All right.
And they have lots of great options, James. It's not like you saw that with the economic team. Cecilia Rouse is a Princeton dean. That's other than being an LSU dean, you don't get any better than that. And she's the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, as I mentioned earlier, the mayor of Atlanta. So Marcia Fudge, no, but other African Americans, of course.
But there could be other, more desirable positions. They're almost going to have to have, it's going to, be difficult. They got the defense and justice of, the 4 headline places with, state and treasury in place. So it's going to be a kind of a chess match there too.
Yeah. I don't know anything inside at all on this. I've talked to a few people who've talked to insiders, but nobody knows. But if appointments were stocks, I might buy a little Jay Johnson right now. I don't know for what, but, it seems to me extraordinarily capable guy, lots of government service, but in the Pentagon, a distinguished lawyer. So, we'll see.
Yeah, and of course there's a lot of that Michelle Flournoy, that she's in the same firm that Tony Blinken is, and they're going to have to disclose. And the fact that it's being held up is, there's a lot going on underneath the water here. We can only speculate. We can only speculate.
Speaking being underwater, there's the current president of the United States, who he gets more. I think he gets more disgraceful with each day. I mean, he's delusional, and the people around him. I can't imagine bringing in a crowd like this. And I guess what's so stunning, it's hard to tell my kids this, but there was a point in our life where Rudy Giuliani was a fairly admired person. I mean, particularly after 9/11, but even before that, as a prosecutor. And now he is just nothing but a nutbag. And another lawyer, Joe DeGenova, was also a pretty admired prosecutor who this week said they ought to execute the person who said it was a fair election. I mean, James, where do they get creatures like this?
But first of all, I've met Rudy Giuliani. I know Joe DeGenova. As a guy, you'd see him at the Palm, and he'd come by. He was a Republican. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? I was married. Blah, blah, boom, boom, boom. And he was the special counsel that investigated Margaret and Janet about the passport thing, and apparently did a thorough job, for all I know. Right? And he was a kind of part of the Washington, conservative legal establishment. And contrast him with a guy like Ben Ginsberg, who was bigger than Joe DeGenova, who's totally vindicated himself. Is totally. I mean, we've had him on the show before. But DeGenova, you look at Sidney Powell. Look at her resume. I mean, she looks like a substantial person. As you pointed out, she finished University of North Carolina Law School in 2 years. She was a federal prosecutor. She prosecuted the guy that killed that federal judge. She looks like a Republican, was a Republican junior league woman or something. I mean, she's perfectly acceptable resume. In fact, an impressive resume. And she's like completely crazy. I mean, what happened to what went through Joe DeGenova, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, where they're like Glenn Beck? I don't understand it.
Well, the only explanation, I agree. Only explanation I can offer, and I hope my daughter's not listening to the show because she hates for me to in any way insult dogs. If you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And by that I mean if you're around Trump, you're going to be tainted. There's almost no exception. He just does that to people, and they make the choice, and they pay the price. And you're right. Ben Ginsberg will be a respected figure 10, 20 years from now. Rudy Giuliani will be a joke as long as anybody remembers his name.
I would love to, when this is all over, I hope somebody, a really good journalist or historian or something, really tries to explain this, because it utterly makes no sense. And I mean, they get laughed out of court. I mean, they get laughed out of court.
By Republican judges, including a Trump-appointed judge.
I mean, but there's no, and it just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. It makes utterly no sense.
Hey, James, this year it's taken a little creative thinking to make the holiday season special. Luckily, we have found one way to bring us all together safely.
I think this is almost the perfect Christmas gift, because this is a holiday gift or whatever you want to call it. But I just think this is just one of the most thoughtful things and best ways to memorialize. We have to memorialize, hard times as well as great times. And families are struggling. And I know my family would, I'd love for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to have a picture of, if we could be together, like this.
Well, these paintings are truly unique and personal, and they're painted at yourlife.com. You can have your painting done by hand from a world-class artist from any photo, and it is at an affordable price, James.
Right. I just think I think that, a necktie is not going to get it done this Christmas. All right, it's not what people are looking for. A new set of knives. But I think something like this really etches into the memory of a family, and I really, and I'm a big fan. I come from a big family. I love family stories, and I think this is something that would, my grandchildren would go back and look at. This is, so I think this is just a terrific idea, and something that is unique and different.
Yeah,
but if you want to buy a necktie and socks, get a necktie and socks.
You're not going to send me socks, James? I'm so disappointed.
I got so many. You get old. What am I doing with all the goddamn socks I got?
Listen, it's quick and it's easy. You can order a custom-made hand-painting portrait in, less than 5 minutes. You get to choose from a team of world-class artists and work with them until every detail is perfect. Then you get your hand-painted portrait in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, look. I mean, I'm really serious. I'm not. Again, I'm a spinner, but this just seems like the sweet spot. I mean that.
Well, I don't know if my daughter's listening or not. My son listens, I know. My daughter sometimes listens. But expect something special if I can get it back by December 25th. At paintyourlife.com, there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money's refunded, guaranteed. And right now, as a limited time offer, get 20% off your painting. That's right, 20% off and free shipping. Now, to get this special offer, text the word politics to 64,000. That's 64,000. That's text politics to the number 64,000. I'm writing it down because I'm going to do it today. Text politics to 64,000 or look for the number in our show notes. Paint your life. Celebrate the moments that matter most, especially during this holiday season and this difficult time. Hey, James, our next guest is at the center of the universe. I don't mean the American universe. The whole eyes of the world are on Georgia, which in a little over a month has 2 Senate races that will determine which party controls the Senate. We have one of the real experts on Georgia politics, Steve Fowler of Georgia Public Broadcasting. He covers elections, he covers voting in Georgia, and he's really good. Why don't you start off, James?
So Stephen, I'm sitting here actually up in Mississippi, and of course I watch everything and read everything, and I got a lot of friends in Georgia. It looks like that the Republicans in Georgia literally, and I'm not saying this because I'm a Democrat, of course I am, it looks like they literally lost their minds. I mean, what does it feel like on the ground? I mean, I watched the Deputy Secretary of State last night. I mean, it feels like people are having a nervous breakdown there. Is there something that I'm missing, or what is it like on the ground? You've been doing this for a long time, and you followed it closer than anybody.
Well, it is a very, very unusual sight, to put it mildly. I've been covering Georgia politics for the last 2.5 years, starting with the 2018 governor's race, where Brian Kemp, who was then Secretary of State, ran against Stacey Abrams, who was a voting rights advocate. And I thought that election was a very knockout, drag-out fight over voting and elections. And then 2020 happened, and 2020, like every other aspect of this year, just amped things up into overdrive. And, you have to remember that Georgia is a Republican state with a Republican governor, a Republican Secretary of State, Republican State House and Senate, and all of the rules and laws governing voting and how the vote count happens is made and enforced by Republicans. But Republicans aren't Trump. I mean, Trump is a Republican, but he is his own entity, and he's come in like a wrecking ball to Georgia's vote counting process. And you said, center of the universe, it feels more like a black hole, just sucking in attention and energy and common sense, just making it where you have the president of the United States, 2 Republican United States senators, the chair of the Georgia Republican Party, and several prominent state lawmakers all attacking the foundations of democracy with how voting works in Georgia. And they're not in the minority.
So, Stephen, this is one play that I've thought about that I think would put Loeffler and Perdue in a difficult spot. And that would be if Biden would have picked Sally Yates as Attorney General. And, of course, Trump can't stand her. And if he threw that grenade out in the middle of this election, Do you think it would make them uncomfortable? They'd have to talk around it, or do you have any view on that?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, the runoff is still, just under 5 weeks away, which is an eternity. But the message, we have we have Mike Pence coming to campaign in Georgia on Friday. We have the president coming on Saturday, and then a big televised debate between Senate candidates on Sunday. And so it seems like the campaigns, at least, are going to try to be laser focused on turning out the Republican base and saying, please vote for us so we can serve as a check on keeping the Senate majority, which is some roundabout way of saying that Joe Biden is going to be president. And they're really, really trying hard at the ground level to make it about turning out votes for the Senate runoff, not acknowledging that Joe Biden is president-elect, not acknowledging that President Trump lost, and really just kind of putting the blinders on that way. And I'm not really sure if there's anything else that can be done by the Biden team or by anyone else that can really distract from that, other than the president himself continuing to attack Governor Brian Kemp and continuing to attack the Secretary of State and the so-called Kraken lawsuit that's happening in federal court. But I think really there's really only one person that can put the squeeze on these campaigns and kind of make it a little bit harder to breathe, and that's Trump himself.
Go ahead, Albert.
Well, let me ask you this. Are these races, is there any possibility of a split verdict, or is it so polarized that there's going to be a unanimous decision one way or another?
If you would have asked me that 3 weeks ago, I would say there is a possibility that David Perdue wins and Raphael Warnock, the Democrat running against Kelly Loeffler, wins, because David Perdue has a little bit stronger footing, even though he attacked Kamala Harris right before the campaign, intentionally mispronouncing her name. Kelly Loeffler, just out the gate, has been unpopular and been dinged for her stock transactions and for being worth $500 million and all these sort of other things. And she was hammered by Doug Collins leading up to the election. But as we've seen the national results come in and we've seen Joe Biden narrowly win Georgia, I think for better or worse, the double barrel race is going to be like most other double barrel races, and whoever wins one seat ends up winning the other, because both the Democrats and Republicans are treating this as running mate campaigns joined at the hip running together. And so I don't think you'll find very many people that look at David Perdue and look at Kelly Loeffler and say, something's different about one of these, so I'm going to vote for a Democrat. And same with the other way. If you're voting for John Ossoff, you're going to vote for Raphael Warnock.
Do you think, Steve, that Trump, he's coming down, he has criticized you, he said the vote was fraudulent, it was fixed and all that. In that context, is he going to be able to turn out those voters in rural Georgia and other counties that voted for him November 3? Will he encourage them? Will it make any difference for turnout for Loeffler and Perdue on January 5th?
It's really, really hard to know, because this election has kind of upended traditional thinking about turnout patterns and modeling. You had a record 5 million votes cast in the general election. You're not going to see that in the runoff. The runoff also has most of the early voting period over the holidays. There's not going to be early voting on Christmas. People aren't going to wake up, check under the tree, and then go cast a ballot. Most locations will be closed. And so you're going to see more people voting by mail and then showing up on Election Day. But Election Day is January 4th. You've still got the New Year hangover. It's cold. And so there's a really big question mark on what the turnout patterns are going to look like. And then you've got the president, who's long said, don't trust absentee by mail voting. But now you've got them saying that the Dominion voting machines might have been rigged. And those are the only two ways to vote in Georgia. And what we've seen, I mean, before the election, I was up at the president's rally in Rome in Northwest Georgia, deep red base, and about 50 people that I talked to asked if they voted by mail, and all 50, I might as well have insulted their entire family lineage by asking if they used a mail-in absentee ballot. So I think it could come back to bite them.
Steve, just to check the record, I said January 5th. Is it January 5th or January 4th?
It's January 5th.
5th. Okay, good. One final question, then back to James. We talked about the Republican turnout. How about blacks? There was a good turnout on November 3rd, not overwhelming. The pastor of Martin Luther King's church, Warnock, is running. What do Democrats realistically expect for a black turnout on January 5?
Well, people do talk about black voters are the backbone of the Democratic Party in Georgia. There's about 30% of the state's registered voters. But the key difference with what Joe Biden cobbled together to win the state, and the key difference is going to make the impact in January is, yes, keeping black turnout in the Atlanta area and in Southwest Georgia, but it's other groups in Georgia that have grown in population in the last decade or so, like Asian American Pacific Islanders and Hispanic vote, although we've seen some of that peel off towards Trump. And honestly, suburban white voters were ones that maybe voted for Joe Biden and then David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, if they're going to stick with those votes or if they're going to switch. So there is no winning Georgia without strong black turnout, but strong black turnout alone is not going to be what makes the difference.
James.
So this analysis is hard to do, but most of the stuff I read says that what we refer to as consultants, that the black share of the total electorate in 2020 or 2018 was about the same as it was in 2016. Is that what your experience dictates to you? Is that what you see as you analyze this so far?
Yeah, looking at the data, it is about the same. But I think what some of the analysis misses is that the white share has gone down. And so, yes, black share has stayed about the same. It's about 30% of what we would expect before. But it's those other demographic groups in Metro Atlanta that have changed, and, enough suburban white voters that switched.
Right. The other in Georgia is probably as big as it is in almost any state in America. The people that neither identify as white or black is a substantial part of the Georgia electorate, and is a real part of the story. So I saw that Loeffler has a new ad, and it's kind of a really soft thing with a black business lady, and how she wants to do this. Should I read anything into that? But it looks to me like some of her polling is coming in, and she's not doing as well in Metro Atlanta among white voters or other voters, and she's trying to soften her image up. Is that a fair conclusion for me to draw, or what?
Yeah, so if you look at the dynamics of the race, David Perdue and John Ossoff have been known entities. They have identified themselves and they have identified each other and defined that race. And so there's not going to be very much wiggle room there. But Kelly Loeffler, even though she's a senator, she was appointed, she still didn't have very much of an image out there. And so for much of the last year, she's been trying to introduce herself to voters, but that introduction has largely happened from mainstream news articles questioning her stock trades and profiting off of the coronavirus allegations. And then she's had Doug Collins attacking her for not being conservative enough. And then she came out with an ad saying she was more conservative than Attila the Hun and posted memes of Donald Trump body slamming COVID molecules. And so she's got to do more to define herself as somebody who is simultaneously an ardent defender of the president, but also not so extreme that you alienate the suburban voters that you need to get across the finish line.
So one more thing, I'm turning back to Albert. So the big news this morning, everywhere I turn around, is these virus numbers are predictably spiking, and you can just read between the lines, the public health people are literally in a panic stage. What's it like in Georgia? Are the numbers starting to spike there, and could this have some effect on early voting turnout or anything like that if it continues down its projected path?
Well, the numbers are rising everywhere across the country. Georgia is no exception. It's nowhere near the peak of things in the summer when things were really bad, but it's also too soon after Thanksgiving to know if people did heed the governor's warnings to avoid traveling, avoid large gatherings. But in Georgia, much like you're seeing now with a resistance towards reality of voting and elections and how things are done there is a large population that has been resistant to the idea of limiting gatherings and mask wearing in public and taking precautionary steps. And so it's really hard because the governor here hasn't been as iron-fisted as other states, but he also hasn't just let the virus run roughshod over people. And so it's a delicate balance to strike that we'll just have to see heading into the depths of winter if enough people are doing the right thing.
You mentioned that there's a debate on Sunday. You also made a passing reference to Kelly Loeffler and charges of insider trading. Loeffler and Perdue are both rich. They are really, really rich. They both engaged in dubious trading during the pandemic. Now, one might argue it was legal. I don't know. A manager made it. But, I mean, I don't know why senators are stock trading anyway. And they made a bunch of money. Doug Collins said that Loeffler profited while Georgians suffered during the pandemic. Does that matter? Do ethics matter in this debate? Or is there so many other issues that it's just, totally irrelevant?
Well, it's really a matter of image and perception. And if you're a Democrat in Georgia, your perception is that David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are super wealthy and out of touch with Georgia. And they are not going to do what it takes to make people feel better during the pandemic and get them the need. But for Republicans, there's not as much of a concern because the investigations that have been opened did not find evidence of insider trading, but it's a matter of optics. And there are some people that say, yes, you're a senator, you're worth this much money. Why are you directing stock trades? Why do you not put it in a blind trust? There are some questions about that, but really, with this runoff election, it's either a turnout election or a persuasion election. But really, this election, for Republicans at least, is solely focused on getting President Trump's base to the polls, and issues and campaign ads and other things that don't directly address that really don't matter.
Well, I would just point out that Loeffler and Perdue say they were cleared by the Senate Ethics Committee. The Senate Ethics Committee would clear the Boston Strangler if he were part of the chamber. They have been cleared by a body that clears almost anyone that comes before them. A couple exceptions, but not very many. And certainly what they did was, at very best, it was outrageously distasteful, and they made a whole bunch of money. And they had some inside information. So maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe there are other things.
I would argue that they need a lot of the same people to come out, particularly like rural whites, the really kind of Trumpy voters. They got to try to bring them out. And I have no proof of this, but I think all of this stock trading stuff in Loeffler particularly, she looks like a wealthy person, and Perdue is, and did this have some suppressive effect where they said, I'm not going to go vote. I don't have any, I hate Democrats, but I'm just not as motivated as I was in November, and they're kind of gutless. I think there's some chance that these stock stories and that kind of stuff can have a suppressive effect on the Republican base.
I think it's less the stock stories and more the president and other top Republicans coming out saying that Democrats manipulated and stole the election from him. Right. The other week, Ronna McDaniel was down here in Cobb County, which is by no means a rural Republican stronghold, but still, Newt Gingrich and others have called it home. In Cobb County, she was shouted down by people saying, why should we bother? Like, if it's already decided, it's rigged. What are you going to do about getting rid of these voting machines and defending the president for a second term? And that's just the reality of the discourse and constant months of hammering you shouldn't trust the outcome if I lose. And that's probably going to be the thing that has the most suppressive effects, and not stories about stock trading or, a wealthy person doing things to make themselves wealthy.
Well, yeah, Steve, I'm sure you're right. That stock trading stuff really, really, really was ugly. It was, if it wasn't illegal, it was unethical, and maybe that's just the way the world is today. You don't pay any price in the era of Trump, but what they both did, they ought to be ashamed of, even if the voters don't feel that way. But I tell you what, we're not ashamed of. We're not ashamed for having you on this show, because you are really good, and you have given us really good insights into Georgia. And I don't suspect you're going to get a lot of rest in the next 5 weeks, Steve. So go to it, and we'll keep checking back with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, 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 very on point, analysis. Just what we needed. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now I want to tell you about an amazing meat company that we've been buying, United Harvest. And what makes that product so good? James, I'll bet you have an idea.
Let's talk about meat. This stuff is like first class. It's tasty. It has you can have like a special event to it. This is a terrific product and a terrific idea. And, it's all locally sourced and local butchers, and it has minimum intervention. And it's quite tasty, and I'm not a part of the nutritionist or a doctor, but I think it's quite good for you.
Well, it's a new delivery company founded by ranchers that provides the best cuts of American beef and lamb, and that follows the highest standards of quality and animal care. All of United Harvest's meat is processed in Oregon by an expert butcher and sold directly. So thanks to United Harvest's sustainable farming process, there's no hormones, GMOs, or unnecessary antibiotics. I know exactly what I'm getting and exactly where it's from. As I've said before, I wasn't a big meat guy, but since testing some of these, boy, they are good. And my wife loves them too. You can taste the difference.
I am actually, I eat a pretty good bit of meat. And I don't think that this is my own view, but I've expressed it. I don't think the meat itself is really bad for you. I think the stuff they put in it. So they go to these feedlots and they just drum them full of antibiotics and steroids, and God knows what else. And these are people that love ranching, that are very good at it, that don't have all of this intervention, and the product is if anything, is tastier than the other stuff. And, they got a well-marbled ribeye steak, which is, one of my favorite cuts. I got lamb chops and that Wagyu top sirloin. But you go out to a big steakhouse, what you got is you're not just eating a sirloin strip. You're eating the steroids and antibiotics and God knows what not they put into this. And the same thing is true in these chicken processing plants. God, the stuff they shoot them up with, you wouldn't believe. So this is not just a highly satisfying culinary product. It's a product that you can eat and feel good about.
Okay, here's what I want you to do. Go to UnitedHarvest.com. That's UnitedHarvest.com, and enter the promo code WARROOM. It's all one word, to get the 20% off site-wide with your order of $50 or more. Now, again, it's UnitedHarvest.com, and use that promo code WARROOM at checkout. You can also look for the link in our show notes. If you value quality, flavor, and convenience, check out UnitedHarvest.com and be sure to use our promo code WARROOM to save 20% off your order of $50 or more. Hey, James, our next guest is something special. Christopher J. Dodd served in the United States Senate for 30 years. In the House before that, he was the author of a number of landmark pieces of legislation. And for over 4.5 decades, he knew and was close to Joe Biden. I think Chris was 7 when it started. But other than family, there may not be anybody who knows Joe Biden as well and is close to Joe Biden as Chris Dodd. And we are lucky to have him today. Christopher, thank you for joining us.
Not at all, Al. Thank you. And thank you, James. Looking forward to chatting with you.
All right.
You are very close, as I said, to the president-elect. Looking at what he's done so far in the months since the election, the appointments, what does it say about him and his likely governance?
I think it says, first of all, a lot, and I think it's tremendously positive. First of all, I'll just say Joe is probably, In fact, I'd be hard-pressed to think of anyone historically of the past 45 presidents who are as well prepared to walk behind and sit at that desk in the Oval Office. He has served longer in Congress, but not just serving in Congress. Chair of Judiciary, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He knows the judicial branch. He knows the legislative branch. And as vice president, of course, developed an intimate relationship with that office. So he's in terms of his knowledge of the three branches of government, we'd be hard pressed to name anyone else historically who is actually personally as aware of how these three branches should operate independently and collaboratively. And so he's tremendously well suited for this job. Secondly, as I look down the appointments he's made, both in terms of the White House staff and the appointments he's made so far, it's a great balance in my view. It's first of all, you have a number of people who know Joe well, and certainly in many ways know him better than I know him because they've worked with him over the years. And so whether you're talking about Mike Donlin or Steve Ricchetti, Jake Sullivan, Kate Bedingfield now, Director of Communication, you go down a pretty long list. He's got around him a lot of people who know him well, and have worked with him. And then simultaneously, he's been reaching out to people like Avril Haines, Neer Tanden, Alexander Mayorkas. These are people I suspect he knows, but come to the job with a lot of experience. They know what they're talking about. They can hit the ground, that proverbial line of running. And so I think he's got a great mix of this. People he's known a long time who are talented, understand him, and people coming in as well who are not terribly well known to him, but I think will do a tremendous job for him because they bring experience to the job. Certainly a Janet Yellen, for instance, at Treasury, has tremendous experience and background for that job. You go down that list. So I think it's been a great start for him. And, the challenge is the elusive goal of the more perfect union. And every administration, I think, tries to strive towards that elusive, impossible goal of perfection, about expanding the opportunities for people. And Joe certainly has done that with his choice of Kamala Harris, which was, of course, historic. The first woman to head Treasury, the first Latino to head the Department of Homeland Security. Avril Haines, the first woman to head the Director of National Intelligence. Just remarkable. They all women senior positions in communications. He's breaking ground. He's opening up the doors. He's telling
and we should point out that, Christopher, you were in charge of that vice presidential search committee. Do you think he's been hindered at all by Trump's? You served through 4 or 5 presidential transitions. Trump's unprecedented actions, insane claims, and refusal to cooperate the way other presidents have. Has that hindered Biden's ability to hit the ground running on January 20th?
Only to the extent, I don't think in a practical way. They're moving forward very aggressively and carefully to fill these slots. But what it has done is caused even greater erosion in the public confidence of our institutions. And that's the great crime, in my view. We'll get over Donald Trump at some point here. But there's an awful lot of people in this country who believe what he's saying. And that makes it job for any incoming president that much harder. We've got an awful lot of work to do in the midst of an incredible pandemic, economic downturn. The world has serious problems that need to be addressed. It doesn't help the new president coming in to have the leaving president, the exiting president, continue to undermine the public's confidence in the office of the presidency and these critical departments that are so important for the operation of our domestic and foreign policy. That's the damage he's doing to the institutions, in my view.
Chris, I'm going to turn this over to James in a minute. One question. You were I remember back in those days, you were one of the few senators who really worked sometimes with Mitch McConnell. Not a lot of, one of the few Democratic senators. It's not the easiest task in the world. Do you think McConnell will be at all receptive to Biden?
Absolutely. Look, first of all, we're very lucky, as we have been historically. You call it luck, call it a blessing. That the right person seems to emerge at the right time for us. And Joe Biden is the perfect person in a way. It's hard-pressed to think of someone else, given his abilities, his talent, his background. And his background includes reaching out. We're a pluralistic society. We want to hold on to our democracy. And if you're going to do that, you've got to deal with people you don't agree with. And Joe Biden, I watched him do it. with people that no one else could work with. And Mitch McConnell may be one of the happier people in town. He won his Senate seat. He's not going to probably run again. He's depending on what happens in Georgia, he could still be majority leader, and he's got a president he can work with. And I'm very confident, knowing Joe and knowing Mitch McConnell. And while I disagree with the dreadful things that he's authored in the last several years, I suspect he's going to want to demonstrate that he can work with someone to help us get back on our feet again. So I remain optimistic about that.
James.
So, Senator Dodd, yesterday, day before yesterday, I saw you had a piece in the New York Times, and with justifiable pride you had in your father and the Nuremberg trials and the accountability that transpired in beginning in December of 1946. One can't help but look at what's happened here in the last 4 years and not wonder, should there be accountability? Now, people will say, we just need to move on. We need to put this behind us. It was a terrible time. The country is healing. Other people, like James Carville, would say that given the response to the pandemic and other things that have happened in the executive branch, we have to have accountability. We have to see what happened. And I took your piece as maybe you in your own way having us revisit history, that you do believe in accountability. And we have to be sure that as we go forward, the mistakes and misdeeds of the past become known to the public. Do you share that Carvillian view?
Well, I do. As a general matter, I do. I mean, I want to be careful here to draw some parallels between the atrocities of the Nazis. I mean, I have strong objections. So there's a significant difference in all of this.
There's a huge difference. I'm just talking about the general. I agree with that, and I should have been even more clear. I'm not saying that this is in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just saying just what it was at its core is accountability.
Well, at Nuremberg it was. I mean, this was an unprecedented event, and it hasn't happened since. So it took the courage of a Franklin Roosevelt, a Harry Truman, to move forward. Just as background for you, of the four Allied powers, Winston Churchill said, "What the devil would you give them a trial for? Let's just line them up and shoot them." The Soviets were far more liberal. They said, "Let's try them for a week and then shoot them." And the French kind of had mixed emotions about it, but it was the United States that said we're going to do for them. That great line that my father made us memorize a lot of things. One of them was the opening remarks of Justice Jackson at Nuremberg. And Jackson said, among other things in that speech, "Four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stayed the hand of vengeance by voluntarily submitting their captive enemies to the judgment of the rule of law, the greatest tribute that power ever paid to reason." It's a remarkable sentence, and it captures the essence of Nuremberg. Truth, the facts, and the rule of law matters. So I believe there will be accountability. It may not happen in a courtroom. State courts may have something to do with it. Joe Biden will have to make that decision. I'm sure he's thinking about it. Certainly, he wants to move on. We cannot spend the next 2 years wrapped up in court proceedings. It may be just what Donald Trump would love more than anything else, to be the lead story every night on national news and what's happened in the latest proceeding. So I believe in accountability. I think there are more than one way of achieving it. And I would also understand if Joe decides that he wants to move the country forward and close this chapter as much as we can. So that's how I would look at it, James.
Okay. So Senator, as I recall your career, you had a particular interest in children's issues. I think that this was something that you've always had. It's got to, how would you advise the President Biden as we move beyond this pandemic, the effect on children, and particularly marginalized children or poor children or even middle-class children in development and being out of school and God knows what now, has got to be profound. Do you have any kind of general ideas of how we can move forward and help these young people around the country? Because it's just going to be an awful issue, and people being out of school and social development. I just shudder when I think about it.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. I've got a 15-year-old daughter who's going to school virtually and has been virtually almost the last year now. And it's, it's working, and the school's doing their best job to make sure they're getting an education. But she misses her friends. She misses the social activity, the athletics, all of those things that are part of that life. And to be a 15-year-old and not have the chance to that kind of engagement, I think is unhealthy. And I know a lot of parents feel that way and educators feel that way. One thing I hope that Joe Biden might pick up, I've never talked to him about this, although I gather they concluded it as part of their economic plans. There's a pending piece of legislation. My former chief of staff and my campaign manager, a congresswoman named Rosa DeLauro.
I know her husband well.
I know you know them well. And I started standing polling back in 1979.
But Mark Warner one time was your chauffeur. You've trained a lot of people, Chris.
I've trained a lot of people.
I interrupted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but the refundable tax credit idea and the direct payment to children with a stroke of a pen. Right now, members of Congress would qualify for that because of income protections. If you reach down into the levels of poverty with that proposal, you can make an immediate difference for these children's lives. We did that with the elderly, and it worked. We took the poorest sector of our population, the elderly, and we took them out of the depths of poverty. And it's a great success story, and it was a fight to get it done. We can do the same thing with children. And I hope that Joe Biden, and I'm confident they will because they've demonstrated already, they care about it. Joe was always a great ally. When I was doing those bills on family and medical leave and the health care provisions with children, he was always a great supporter of what we were trying to push forward. That's one bill, as well as the child care legislation. I authored that first bill since World War II back in the 80s, and it made a huge difference to people. And today we need to make sure you can keep those doors open. You can't get women back to work and men back to work if they cannot place their child in a safe, secure place. And so that's got to be an immediate goal, to get those doors back open, make sure they can be clean and safe, and children can begin that learning process that is so critical. So I'm confident that'll be part of the agenda. And lastly, I'd mentioned 0 to 3, and that is the brain development of children. Mark Shriver and others have really worked hard on this over the years, and we don't pay much attention. But science will tell you categorically that if that child gets the proper treatment and care, and that span of 0 at birth up to 3 or 4 years old, it can make a huge difference, James, in that child's development in the coming years. So I hope the 0 to 3 programs, the child care, and getting that refundable tax credit back to poor children would be a major part of their agenda starting out.
Well, I just want to concur with James on that, marvelous piece you had in the Times, a letter about your dad in Nuremberg and Justice Jackson. And I hope we can still see the video that he showed that day. Chris, is that still available?
It is. And in fact, he became a little piece of history.
Just let me interrupt to say for listeners, Chris's dad later became Senator Thomas Dodd, was one of the chief prosecutors under Justice Jackson at Nuremberg. And this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. It was the summer of 45. He wrote my mother every single day. I published my father's letters to my mother. He wrote 400 letters every night. In the fall of 1945, Wild Bill Donovan, for your listeners may remember that name, he was the head start of the OSS, and he was Robert Jackson's number 2 at Nuremberg. They couldn't get along with each other. They had terrible disagreements. And so Donovan leaves in the fall of 45, and Jackson asked my father was 38 years old, to become his number 2 at the first prosecutions. And so he had 180 lawyers underneath him for the next almost 11 months to try and manage our part of the trial itself. And it was wrote my mother every night explaining what was going on. It's a great first draft of history. Today, we'd be sending texts and emails of 2 or 3 lines, but each of the letters were 8, 10, 12, 14 pages long, handwritten every single night. I only discovered them in 1993. I didn't know they existed. I was a year old when he went to Nuremberg. And I began reading them. And I'll tell you one thing that he says in a letter written on June 1st, 1946. He's a much older voice by June of 46 than he was in the summer or the early fall of 45. And he says to my mother in that letter, "I will never do anything as important in my life again." This has been, I hope the rest of the world takes note of what we've done here and will follow the law that we tried to set here about this kind of behavior in the world. And I think back to his life, it changed everything for him. The human rights issue was a dominant theme of his service in public life thereafter. And it was pretty provocative in that moment of his life. at age 38 or 39 to recognize he'd probably never do anything as significant again as being involved in an historic trial of that magnitude. So we all learned about it growing up around our dining room table. He told us stories about individuals and people, the atrocities he saw. That film he showed for the first time on November 29th, 1945, 75 years ago, this past Sunday, set the tone. And where he said basically facts are important, the truth is important, and the rule of law is important. And that's relevant today is what we've been through with truth and facts, and the rule of law seem to be taking a back seat. So thank you, Al, for mentioning.
No, it sure is. And everybody, you ought to get that book that Chris wrote. Those letters really they're marvelous, and they're some of them are quite emotional to read. And I want to get that video. Chris, I hate to do this, but I'm going to do a transition to crass politics now. And that is, it was a great victory for the Democrats with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But down ballot, it was quite a disappointing night. Do you have any theory as to why?
Well, I don't. I mean, it's because there wasn't any campaign per se that we can point to that urged people to, make sure you give us divided government. Whether or not it was that people were sending a message that they wanted their Congress to be Republican, more Republican than certainly anyone imagined it would be. They wanted to get rid, when you have almost now, what is it, number 5, 6, 7, 8 million people, said they wanted a change at the top. And that was pretty clear, given the votes that occurred across the country, the Electoral College outcome. So there may have been that thought. I want Joe Biden to win. I'm worried about reaching too far, either economically or in foreign policy. And so I'm going to go in and do what people did in the state of Maine. And we were just talking about that earlier. Susan Collins won handily by 9 points, I think it was, statewide when Joe Biden was carrying the state of Maine. The congressman in the 2nd district, the Democrat, carried his district pretty substantially, and Donald Trump swamped tremendously, won that 2nd district overwhelmingly. So there clearly were different messages occurring. It's the first time I've seen party vote splitting in recent memory. It used to happen all the time, but it looked this time that people actually spent more time on a ballot, maybe because they were mail-in ballots. The people labored over them longer than they do when they normally go in and cast a ballot on a machine, or only have that 30 or 40 seconds with someone else is waiting behind them in line to cast a ballot. So I think these early voting mail-in ballots may begin to see a return of people spending more time thinking more about what message they want to send as a voter. And that may have had a lot to do with it. It's my view.
James.
So, Senator, first of all, the common conventional wisdom, there are no swing voters. Well, guess what? They are.
There are.
Right? And one of the points I would make, that I like to make, and if you like it, you can make it when people call you. Florida in 2018 passed the felon's right to vote with over 60% or better to vote. Florida in 2020 passed a $15 minimum wage with 60% of the vote. Maybe there's something wrong with the campaigns that we're running in Florida. All right? Mm-hmm. Maybe we had, maybe, in 2018, it was 3 words: protect pre-existing conditions. It stuck with people. In 2020, there were 3 words that stuck with people, never uttered by Joe Biden, but defund the police. All right? And I think the country is very open to the application of smart interventions on behalf of the government to make people's lives better. I think the country was saying is we're not looking for radical, systemic, bottom-up, explosive change. That's my view, and I think the fact that you get 60% of the minimum wage and you get 47% of the vote, I think is a message in there to people. I really do. And I just make that point. I agree with you.
I think you're dead right, James, on that point. And again, I think messages, we sometimes the messages get when they're compound sentences and paragraphs long, and I say that respectfully. I understand, but people they're smart enough to figure out what you mean by it. But they'd like some clarity with it as well. And if you get the wrong words on this thing, and you saw Donald Trump take advantage of this, make America great again. Everyone laughed at it and so forth. But there were a lot of people, he didn't have to say much more. It was a very pregnant phrase, to use that expression, because there was an awful lot of messages included in that message. In a sense, I think if we keep some of our messages shorter and leave it up to people to understand what we're driving at, we can get better results on exactly the points you're making. Those two ballots you talk about, I mean, a $15 minimum wage is very clear in allowing people who clean up after they get out of prison to have the right to restore their civic rights. Here is a very clear, straightforward message. It's not confused with a lot of alternative message simultaneously. And I think the more clear we can be, the more concise we can be, and leave it to the voter to explore the deeper, greater meanings of that, I think we would do better. So if that's your point, I agree with you.
We're in vigorous agreement on that. I mean, really vigorous agreement, to say the least.
I love that. Chris Dodd, you've been a wonderful guest. You know, we both go back quite a ways. I think about a lot of people that we wish were here to watch Joe Biden when he's sworn in on January 21st. Of course, members of his family who aren't here. But two I think of in particular that I think you can certainly identify with are Ted Kennedy and Fritz Hollings. Boy, would they love this, huh?
I got one more final question.
Wait a minute. Let Chris respond to that.
Okay. Well, I think you did right. I mean, Teddy'd be driving Joe crazy in the sense he'd have a million ideas every hour, the things he ought to be taking on and doing. and Joe would be trying to get someone else to take the calls. But Teddy had a great joy of life, and he cared deeply about policy and ideas. And Fritz Hollings just would have loved the idea. I was with Joe. Joe gave the eulogy at Fritz Hollings' funeral service in South Carolina. And it was a great event. It was one of these things, the Congress was out of session. The pandemic was kind of kicking around and so forth. And so it wasn't there was a lot of turnout of South Carolinians, but a handful of us, like Weich, Fowler, and myself, were there. And obviously Joe gave a great eulogy. So you're dead right. Two people who are enjoying immensely what's unfolding. And they'd be very proud of what he's doing and the diversity he's attracting to his new administration, keeping those people he knows well around him who know him, a great combination. It's very smart. It's exactly what Teddy'd be recommending, and Fritz would be as well. So,
James, wrap it up quickly.
When this pandemic is over and I go back to Connecticut, where should I have my first pizza?
Well, you got to be careful. Now, I have a daughter who's going to start as a freshman. She's taking a gap year at Yale. And so I'm not going to screw things up for her by making a recommendation and ruining her first few days at Yale next fall. So you go to Sally's or Pepe's, and you're just going to try and get me in trouble. Thank God I don't have to run for office anymore. But I'm sort of a Sally's guy. I mean, that's what I'd recommend. But Grace will have to make up her own mind.
All right.
Hey, listen, I want to tell you, we have been honored to have you on this show, Christopher J. Dodd. We look forward to seeing you when this whole thing is over, and best to your family.
Well, thanks. This is a great program you've got. I'm a faithful listener. And so
thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
As well. You bet.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Same to you, Chris. No matter what stage of life we're in, there's never been a better time to keep learning. And that's what the Great Courses Plus is all about.
Boy, is it. I mean, the idea that a person can get this kind of expertise and this kind of knowledge just sitting in your living room. I mean, 20 years ago, people would have paid a fortune, and there's literally not a topic that you can think of that they don't cover. This is a stunning product, and it's really a stunning product for people like us who are seniors who actually have more time than most people, but who love learning, and we have a particular interest in history and military affairs, but anything you're interested in, with they don't just have the history of art; they have the history of art, in Holland in 1675 or whatever it was. I mean, the granular detail that you can get here is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is. The Great Courses Plus, they offer unlimited learning at a time when we need it most without the added pressure of homework or grades. And you're right, you and I love the history, but we're also going to use it to train the 3-month-old golden retriever puppy because they have a great course on that too, James.
I can't train it. I like dogs, but I can't get them to do anything. I think that the most relevant one to have right now, and the next one I'm going to do, is on white-collar criminal law. Because I got a feeling that's something we're going to be discussing quite a bit in the coming years.
So join us now and sign up for the Great Courses Plus today. And right now, our listeners get a free month of unlimited access. That's access to any and all courses for an entire month, completely free. So don't wait any longer. Sign up today using our special URL. Start your free month at thegreatcoursesplus.com/war room. That's all one word. And don't forget thegreatcoursesplus.com/war room. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/war room, and you can look for the link in our show notes. Once again, a whole bunch of really terrific questions from our listeners, and it's hard to choose because there's so many good ones. But let me start off with Neil in Sydney, Australia, who asked James about Michael Flynn. He's benefited from a pardon, having been found guilty of a crime. Now there's a discussion of other officials, family members, and everybody else under the sun receiving pardons prior to January 20th. Pardons for what, he asked? How does it work? I mean, what do you do?
Well, the first thing is, as soon as I get my second shot, you can meet me at the Sydney airport because I think I'm going to go there.
There's hope. There's hope now, James.
I've been to Sydney. And, it's that opera house is one of those things, and that you see it, and it's actually as gorgeous as you think it is. Sometimes you see something, you go, oh well, all right, I've seen that before. Sydney Harbor is one of the true great treasures of the world. So Michael Flynn is another person. He was a distinguished soldier. He really was. And he was considered to be like a smart guy. He had respect around. And he went totally nuts.
Yeah.
Totally nuts. And this is the great mystery to me, is what drove all of the, I'm sure he was a Republican. I'm sure he was conservative. That was so be typical of a general officer at the time he was coming up. I cannot explain Michael Flynn. I cannot begin to explain him, other than he wanted to make a lot of money, which was clear. Which that's a whole other problem. That one of the biggest revolving doors in all of Washington are these retired generals and admirals.
Right.
But he was a smart guy, and he was a highly respected soldier, general officer.
Yeah.
Who went bonzo. And, what now Sidney Powell is representing him. If you would have looked at Sidney Powell 5 years ago, and you would have looked at Flynn 5 years ago, you would have said that they are impressive people. And the same goes for so many people that are, Joe DeGeneres. I'm sorry. Well, I wish I had a better answer for you.
The interesting question really is the other way around. Who has not been tainted by him? It's almost impossible to think of anyone. Let me just add to Neil. We ought to remember. Yeah, but it was those who got close to him, almost without exception. Let me just go to Neil's question and say, when Michael Flynn accepts the pardon, that is tacit to an admission of guilt. I mean, I'm sorry, it is. So he can't say he's been cleared because he has not been. Secondly, Michael Flynn became a serial liar. He didn't just lie to the FBI. He didn't just lie to Mike Pence and the press secretary about his involvement in conversations with the Russians. He lied about his lobbying for Turkey. He lied about his lobbying in the UN on behalf of Israel. So he really deserved what he got, and now he's going to run around saying that I'm an innocent man. No, he's not.
First of all, he pleaded guilty. All right, and this is something I don't practice law, and God knows whatever. Do you know how long it takes to enter a guilty plea? That the judge says, okay, are you on any medication? Did you sleep? Did you talk to your lawyer? Do you understand? I mean, it's like a 45-minute process. It's under oath. He doesn't have to acknowledge he's guilty. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't. This is not if Rudy Giuliani gets a pardon, I guess to some extent maybe he's got to admit something. But I mean, Michael Flynn is convicted.
Well, I'm sorry, Neil. I wish we could give you a better answer, but it's just the way the system works. I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't do. There's a question from Larry, and I'm going to answer it first because he is from Louisiana, James.
Okay,
he says, I understand.
He just said Louisiana. Did he say a hometown?
He doesn't say a hometown.
All right, okay.
But he says he understands free speech, but when the President of the United States says things repeatedly that damage democracy, is the vote the only recourse we have? Basically, yes. Presidents are immune from any kind of prosecution for things they say. The libel laws against public officials, slander laws are very difficult to start with. And yeah, that is basically the only recourse we have other than shame and other than possible criminal action later, because some of the things he said may well have had a bearing on things he did.
Yeah, the possible criminal action is a very important component here. And just so you know, I'm not one of these let bygones be bygones guy. We got to find out what the bygones are before we let them go. Yeah. And my own personal view is that he is a career criminal, and career criminals have a tendency to commit crimes. Now, that's just a personal view of mine, but I think that we need an exhaustive look at a lot of things on a lot of different fronts here. But he might be immune from libel laws. He's not immune from bribery laws.
You'll see next. The other thing also is any grand jury can call him, can call people before that, and if they've been, pardoned, right. He's pardoned himself. He has to testify under threat of penalty of perjury. Right. The reason I asked the question in Louisiana, because the next one is really for you. How should black leaders in the South understand or navigate the tension? This is from Matthew. He doesn't say where he's from. Between a universal approach to politics and the reality of racial discrimination and identity. How does the Democratic Party apply these lessons?
First of all, if you look at people like Cedric Richmond, you look at people like Mayor Lance Bottoms, or you look at people like Clyburn, you look all across, or even LaToya in New Orleans. I mean, they are, of course, they're leaders in their community, but they're universalist leaders also. I mean, they understand. Have a good grip of the whole playing field. And, I think that a lot of them are just been, excellent public servants. And I think they've served not just their own community, but the general public as well. I mean, You always have the exceptions. I'm sure you do. But most of and I know a lot of Southern, black leaders, and most of them are pretty talented and pretty pragmatic. It's been my experience at any rate.
Yeah, no. I agree with you, totally. Our next question is from Nigel in the UK, and I only regret the fact that I have to ask it, and we can't hear Nigel with that marvelous accent, which makes us all feel less smart to ask it. But he said, from this side of the pond, I'm amazed there are conspiracy theories suggesting Republican voters, this is in Georgia, should not vote for Loeffler and Perdue. Would you consider it dirty politics if some non-Republican created effective social media sites which champion a Senate write-in campaign for Donald J. Trump? Well, it'd be dumb to do. First of all, you don't want to do it if you're a Democrat. And Roger Stone is already doing it. He's a nutbag, but he's a right-wing nutbag. I don't think it's going to make any difference.
Well, if I thought it'd work, I'd do it myself.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Okay, I don't have any ethical or moral qualms about doing it. It's totally legal. And my problem is I don't think it'd be particularly effective and would probably backfire.
And could backfire.
But I don't have a issue at all. In the Doug Jones 2017 race, we ran a write-in campaign for Nick Saban. Mm. And so, we ran ads showing how to write Nick Saban's name in, and actually in Lee County, which Auburn is, how to write Gus Malzahn's name in.
You wouldn't want to do Nick Saban in Auburn. I think that was smart.
Right. And by the way, they got 22,000 votes between them, which is more than Doug won by. But I totally think it would be a good idea if I thought it worked. I wouldn't have an issue with it at all.
This is also for you. Ryan from Illinois. I'm a 40-year-old lifelong Democrat. My dad was a coal miner in central Illinois, and I still have fond memories of the Bill Clinton presidency. Would Bill Clinton be able to run on his own policies in today's era?
Shit, Woody. This is like what we found out in November. This is Bill Clinton's America, not AOC's America. The minimum wage carried 60% in Florida. Right? That people are. And read Tom Etzel this morning, who is a guy that you and I both almost worship. All right?
He's right up there with Clyburn.
Yeah, he's right up there with Clyburn. I'll listen to Jim Clyburn. All right? Listen to Jim Clyburn. What he said after the election. This lurch to the left, even, President Obama said that, that defund the police was not helpful. Look, in 2018, there were 3 words: protect pre-existing conditions. That stuck with people. In 2020, there were 3 words: defund the police. That stuck with people. So I think that, the Clinton-Obama policies are the policies that by across the breadth of the country that are embraced, and across the Democratic Party they're embraced. So the experience in 2018 and 2020 has just borne this out.
Well, I agree, and that leads us into a question from Judith, who is from Stockport, Ohio. She says correctly, young people face a scary future thanks to climate change, the 2-step forward, 1-step back routine that's been going on for years. It's not going to be sufficient. Aren't AOC and others right to demand something be done? Well, of course they're right to demand something be done. It's just, I think, often what they ask to be done, A, is not achievable, and B, may not even be desirable. I am for a greatly expanded Affordable Health Care Act. I think there ought to be a public option. I think people under 65 ought to be able to buy into Medicare. I'm for doing something about drug prices. I think there are all sorts of things you can do. I am not for a Medicare for all that takes away the option of private insurance. And I'm not for it. I don't think it's good policy, but what I know is it's lousy politics. So yes, they're right, Judith, that they ought to demand something. It's just a case of what they demand.
So there are 2 screaming policies that dwarf everything else that's not going to war, which is not is always a possibility, and that is the massive inequality and massive climate issues we have. So something must be done. This is something, ergo this must be done. That is the most flawed logic in the world. All right? When we talk about inequality, we talked about on this show, which I think is the best single idea to deal with inequality, and that is baby bonds.
Yeah.
All right? That is something, that is something smart that can be done. And that is, and of course the person from Ohio is exactly right. These problems are really, really deep and really profound, but that there are really smart, intelligent ways you can. What it boils down to, and my last class with my students, and this whole idea people question this very premise that people like me, and I think I would include you in there, you're welcome to dissent if you want to, believe that by the application of smart policy, the government can give people a better life, a better chance in life, or greater opportunities. I fundamentally believe that. Now, that belief, that core belief, is kind of under attack. That you're not going to do it through the very system. You have to blow the thing up. Or you have to start with socialism, but you have to blow up and that is the essence. That is the basis of Clintonism or Obamaism. That yes, you can do things that are smart, and if you do smart things, it can lead people to have a better life. All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, and it's been proven, since the New Deal, if not before that, and. Those who say that, the Tea Party types, when you go back at them and say, well, maybe we wouldn't end Social Security. Oh, well, maybe we wouldn't end Medicare. Well, no, we wouldn't dismantle. We wouldn't turn all of our swords into plowshares. And yeah, you got to have air traffic controllers. It seems that they really are going after programs that serve poor people, but they're not going to succeed. This is the final question, though. This is from Bluebell, Pennsylvania. James.
Oh, wow. No,
and this is good for you. Should Make America Great Again people be given seats at the table under Biden? Could he see the value of doing what Lincoln did? Friends close, enemies closer.
Well, first of all, somebody's going to have a seat at the table because they either got 52, 51, or 50 Senate votes. And somebody's going to have a seat at the table because we only got like a five-person majority in the House. So, and I think that Biden understands that. But it's just what you dealt with is the same thing Lincoln was dealing with. Is you dealt with the reality of politics. And the reality of politics is you're going to have to make deals with people that you find distasteful or you don't like. But that cannot be helped, and not even to mention the federal court system that you got that's looming heavily over you every day. So I don't think there's a choice here.
Yeah, I
really
agree. You can't get, unless, even if you go and the Democrats are lucky enough to win 2 seats in Georgia, it's going to be very hard to get much done legislatively without at least a little Republican help. So that's the nature of what the election result was.
You know what? And people like me will say, let's get them in 2022.
Yeah.
But we're not doomed for 4 years.
No, we're not, but let's get done as much as we can get done now, because people are really hurting, and if you can make them hurt less a little bit, even
awful.
That's good. Well, keep those cards and letters coming, because we really, really appreciate it, and they're really good questions, and I hope the answers are almost as good as the questions.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of the show.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville and Al Hunt. Remember to email your questions, that's James' favorite part of the show, to politicswarroom@gmail.com, or tweet them for next week's show @Politicon. Thank you for subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our war room planning for 2021.